So what happens when a global spiritual leader and the political leader of a superpower collide? And I'm not talking about some polite disagreement here. We're talking about a full-blown, high-stakes clash that all kicked off with a single social media post. It's a conflict that the source material for this explainer frames as nothing less than a battle for America's soul. So let's get into it and see exactly how this whole thing unfolded.
Okay, so it all started on April 12th. Donald Trump gets on his social media platform and just launches this really direct, really personal attack on Pope Leo XIV. And he wasn't just criticizing policy. He also called the Pope a self-described all-MAGA Floridian. It's this weird mix of a political jab and this bizarre kind of mocking claim of loyalty. Right there, the stage was set for a major showdown.
But, the words were only half the story. Along with that post came this AI-generated image, and it shows Trump in this Christ-like pose, right? He's supposedly healing people. There are American flags everywhere. This wasn't just politics anymore. This was theology. It took what could have been a war of words and blew it up into this huge, symbolic, and very religious conflict.
All right, so you've got this really direct, really public challenge. How on earth does the Vatican respond? Let's dive into the Pope's moral stand and see what they did next.
The Pope's response, it wasn't a tweet, it wasn't some press release. No, it came straight from the heart of the Catholic Church, St. Peter's Basilica. During a prayer vigil, he gets up and he doesn't actually say Trump's name. But he really didn't need to, did he? He just publicly condemned what he called the delusion of omnipotence that was driving the U.S. I mean, that's a pretty heavy critique of an entire nation's moral direction. And he got even more direct when he talked about the stakes. In a clear shot at the administration's foreign policy talk, Pope Leo called the threat to wipe out an entire civilization truly unacceptable. Now, you gotta understand, in the super careful world of diplomacy and theology, when a pope says something is truly unacceptable, that is not a suggestion. That is an absolute moral condemnation. It's basically him drawing a huge red line in the sand. So this moral stand, it didn't stay just words for long. It turned into diplomatic action, and fast. First, the Vatican calls in the U.S. ambassador for what officials literally described as a bitter lecture. Yikes. And during that meeting, this really shocking claim apparently came up, that the U.S. needs to have one official who uses God's name to control the other. Now, the Pentagon denied this account, but still, wow. And then came the final, very public snub. The Pope flat out declined President Trump's invitation to the U.S. 250th anniversary. That's a big deal. Okay, so that's the Vatican's side of the story, but what about Trump's supporters? I mean, how do they square his actions with their own faith? Well, that brings us to this really interesting idea of the vessel and his allies. And this is the big question, right? It's kind of a central puzzle here. How does the leader keep all this passionate religious support when he's in an open fight with, the Pope? Well, the answer, at least according to our source material, is found in this really powerful theological idea, one that basically separates the person from their divine purpose. And that idea is called vessel theology. It's actually a pretty simple concept, but it's also incredibly profound. The belief is that God can use anyone, as his instrument or his vessel here on earth. So a leader's personal life, their flaws, their morals, even if they're a believer or not, none of that really matters. It's all secondary. The only thing that counts is that they're being used by God to get something done. A great way to understand this is to look at the classic biblical example, King Cyrus. Cyrus was a pagan king, not a believer at all, but he was the one God chose to free the Israelites. The argument today is pretty similar. It's a transactional deal. The leader gets the support they need to win and keep power, and in return, they deliver the goods for their religious supporters. Things like conservative judges, certain policies, that kind of stuff. But, and this is a really important point, you can't think that the American Catholic community is all on the same page here. Not even close. In fact, there's been some serious pushback from the top. You've got Cardinal Kupich of Chicago calling the war talk sickening. You've got Cardinal McElroy in Washington questioning if the administration's actions even meet the criteria for a just war, which is a really big deal in Catholic teaching. Even the official U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops put out a statement calling Trump's attack on the Pope disheartening. So yeah, the flock is definitely divided. And this division inside the church really shows you what the bigger stakes are here. This is so much more than just a personal fight between two powerful men. As our source material puts it, this is a full-on battle for the soul of America. So let's just lay it all out. You've got two completely opposite worldviews clashing here. On one side, you have the Pope's stand. Power has to have moral limits. period. Faith is universal, it's bigger than any one country, and its job is to keep power in check. And on the other side, you have Trump's position. Faith is a tool. You fuse it with your political goals, it's something you use for national and political wins, and if any moral limits get in your way, you just reject them.
And this brings us to the real core of the arguments, at least according to the author we're looking at. The whole thing boils down to this fundamental idea, that power cannot survive without moral limits. What they're saying is this isn't just another political squabble. This is a fight over a basic principle. Should power have to answer to anything, to any moral authority outside of itself?
And if you look at it that way, Trump's whole approach, it's not a mistake, it's not a flaw. The rage, the defiance, the throwing out of old rules, that's not a bug in the system. It is the system. It's the whole point. It's all designed to show off and build up a kind of power that just refuses to be told no.
Which leads us to the author's final, pretty provocative take on why Trump reacted the way he did. They argue that he knows what Pope Leo is doing, and he knows that it is working. The idea here is that the anger itself is the tell. The rage in that social media post is basically an admission that the Pope's moral challenge is actually hitting its mark and having a real effect.
And so, that's where we're left, with the huge question this whole conflict raises. It's a question that's so much bigger than just these two men, and it's the one the source material really wants us to think about. When raw political power decides to team up with a nation's main religion, and together they just throw out all moral limits, what does that do to the